Have you ever felt like you were being punished for doing the right thing? For showing a shred of humanity in a world that demands you be a machine? For Chloe Martinez, a struggling single mother and waitress, one small act of kindness was about to cost her everything. She gave a free meal to a man who had nothing, and for that she was fired, humiliated, and cast out. She went home that night believing her life was over. But she had no idea that the destitute man she helped was not who he seemed, and that the next morning a knock on her door wouldn't just change her life, it would ignite a revolution that would shake a multi-million-dollar corporation to its very core. Stay with us for a story that proves kindness is never ever a mistake. The air in The Gilded Spoon was a thick concoction of frying oil, burnt coffee, and the cloying scent of the industrial-strength cleaner used to wipe down the sticky laminate tables. For Chloe Martinez, it was the smell of survival. At 28, she navigated the narrow aisles between booths with a practiced economy of motion, her worn-out black sneakers squeaking a familiar rhythm on the checkered linoleum. Each day was a marathon, and this Wednesday was no different. It began before dawn in her cramped one-bedroom apartment, the one with the persistent water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a sad face. Her first task was always Leo. Her 6-year-old son, a whirlwind of energy with eyes as bright as polished obsidian, was the sun around which her entire universe orbited. He also had chronic asthma, a constant low-grade hum of anxiety in the back of Chloe's mind. "Mummy, can I have the sugary cereal today?" Leo had asked, his voice still thick with sleep, as he held up a colorful box, a forbidden treasure usually reserved for birthdays. Chloe knelt, smoothing his tousled brown hair. "Not today, sweetie. We have to make sure you have your strong lungs for school." She kissed his forehead, ignoring the pang of guilt. The strong lung food was oatmeal, which was cheap. The sugary cereal was a luxury they couldn't afford this week. Not when Leo's prescription for his emergency inhaler needed refilling, and the rent was due on Friday. Every dollar was a soldier assigned to a critical post, and there were never enough to win the war. The pressure mounted the moment she clocked in at the Gilded Spoon. Her manager, Brenda Walsh, a woman whose smile was as thin and sharp as a shard of glass, was in rare form. "Martinez Table 4 has been waiting for their check for 3 minutes," Brenda snapped, pointing a perfectly manicured finger without looking up from her tablet. "Our target table turnover time is 45 minutes. You're at 52. That's money walking out the door." They were deciding on dessert. "Brenda," Chloe said, her voice carefully neutral, "I can't rush them out. You can strategically encourage their decision," Brenda retorted, her eyes finally flicking up to meet Chloe's. They were cold, devoid of empathy. "Offer the quickest option. Upsell the coffee to go. It's not rocket science, it's profit. Sterling Hospitality Group doesn't pay us to make friends. It pays us to make money." Sterling Hospitality Group, the faceless corporate giant that owned the Gilded Spoon and 100 other mid-tier eateries across the country. To Chloe, it was an abstract entity, a name on her paycheck that dictated policies from a skyscraper she couldn't imagine. Policies like no free water without a food order and any food sent back to the kitchen for any reason must be logged and disposed of, never consumed by staff. Chloe forced a tight-lipped nod and hurried to table 4. The rest of her shift was a blur of taking orders, refilling drinks, and dodging Brenda's hawkish gaze. She performed the delicate dance of the service industry, being warm but not familiar, efficient but not rushed, attentive but not intrusive. She smiled when a customer told a bad joke. She commiserated when a steak was slightly overcooked. She conjured up a birthday cupcake with a candle for a little girl, earning a beaming smile that was worth more than any tip. These small moments of human connection were the only things that made the job bearable. They were tiny sparks of light in the monotonous grind. She saw herself not just as a waitress, but as a temporary caretaker for the people at her tables. For a brief hour, she was there to make their day a little bit better, a little easier. It was a philosophy that was fundamentally at odds with Brenda Walsh's and, by extension, Sterling Hospitality's bottom line. Kindness couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. Empathy didn't contribute to the quarterly profit margin, and for a company laser-focused on efficiency, a heart was a liability. As the lunchtime rush began to wane, replaced by the slower pace of the late afternoon, Chloe allowed herself a moment to breathe. She leaned against the service counter, rolling her aching shoulders. She glanced at the clock. 3 more hours. 3 more hours until she could pick up. Leo read him a story and collapse into a fitful sleep before doing it all again. It was a grueling existence, a tightrope walk over a chasm of financial ruin. And she was about to find out just how fragile that rope truly was. He came in around 3:15 p.m., a time when the restaurant was a ghost town. The lull between lunch and dinner was Chloe's least favorite part of the day. The hours crawled tips were scarce, and Brenda often used the downtime for performance reviews, which were thinly veiled critiques of every perceived failing. The man who walked through the door didn't look like a typical Gilded Spoon customer. He was probably in his late 50s with a face etched with the kind of deep lines that come not from laughter, but from worry. His greying hair was unkempt, and a scruffy salt and pepper beard covered his jaw. But it was his clothes that stood out, a faded olive-green coat that was too thin for the unseasonably cool autumn air, worn jeans and boots that looked like they had walked 1,000 miles, every one of them uphill. He hovered uncertainly by the entrance, his eyes scanning the empty booths as if looking for an escape route. "Table for one?" Chloe asked, offering him the same warm, practiced smile she gave everyone. He flinched as if surprised to be spoken to. "Oh, yes. Just one." His voice was raspy low. She led him to a small booth in the corner, the one by the window that looked out onto the bustling street. "Coffee to start?" she asked, placing a menu in front of him. Just water, please. For now." He wouldn't meet her eyes, focusing instead on the silverware rolled in a paper napkin. Chloe got him the water and gave him space. She'd seen men like him before. Men on the edge, their pride, the last thing they had left, stretched thin and fragile. She could feel Brenda's eyes on her from across the restaurant. A single customer ordering only water during a slow period was a black mark in Brenda's book. It was an occupied table, not generating revenue. After 10 minutes, Chloe went back. "Ready to order, sir." The man looked up, and for the first time, she saw the profound exhaustion in his eyes. They were a startlingly clear blue, but they were clouded with a deep, unsettling sadness. "I'm still looking." He mumbled, his gaze dropping back to the menu he clearly wasn't reading. Chloe knew the script. He was hungry, but he had no money. He was trying to work up the courage to either leave or to ask for something he knew he couldn't have. Her heart ached for him. He reminded her of her own father after he'd been laid off from the steel mill years ago. That same look of a man hollowed out by circumstances beyond his control. Brenda marched over her heels, clicking ominously on the floor. "Is there a problem here, Martinez?" she asked, her voice loud enough for the man to hear. "No problem, Brenda. The gentleman is just deciding." Brenda looked the man up and down her lip, curling in a subtle sneer of disgust. "This isn't a library. The Gilded Spoon is a place of business. Either order or vacate the table." The man visibly shrank into his seat. A flush of shame crept up his neck. I'm sorry. I'll just... He began to slide out of the booth, his movements slow and defeated. Something inside Chloe snapped. It was the injustice of it, the casual cruelty. This man wasn't bothering anyone. He was just trying to find a moment of warmth and peace in a world that had clearly been unkind to him. "He's with me," Chloe said suddenly, the words leaving her mouth before her brain could veto them. Brenda and the man both stared at her. "What did you say?" Brenda demanded. "He's my uncle." Chloe lied, her heart pounding. "He just got into town. I told him to meet me here for a late lunch. My treat." She turned to the man, giving him a desperate, pleading look, hoping he would understand. "Right, uncle." "Bob?" The man. Bob Serge looked at her, his blue eyes wide with confusion. He hesitated for a heartbeat, a silent moment, where he could have exposed her lie and scurried away. But then he saw the genuine plea in her expression. He gave a slow, hesitant nod. "Yes. Chloe. Good to see you, kid." Brenda's eyes narrowed into slits. She was suspicious Chloe could tell, but the lie was just plausible enough to put her on the back foot. "Your staff meal discount only applies to you, Martinez, not your extended family." "I know," Chloe said, maintaining a brave front. "I'll pay for it full price, from my tips." Brenda stared at her for a long, hard moment, then spun on her heel and marched back towards her office. "Fine, but I want to see a receipt for that order." Chloe let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She turned back to Bob, whose face was a mixture of shock and gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," he whispered. "Everyone deserves to eat," she whispered back, pushing the menu towards him. "Please, order whatever you want. It's on me." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, more analytical. For a brief second, the facade of a beaten-down man slipped, and she saw a sharpness, an intelligence that seemed out of place. But just as quickly it was gone, replaced by the weary sadness she'd first seen. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means." He ordered the shepherd's pie, the restaurant's most hearty and filling dish. As Chloe walked away to put in the order, she felt a strange mix of fear and satisfaction. She knew she had just crossed a line. She just didn't know how catastrophic that transgression would be. Putting the order in for Uncle Bob felt like a small act of rebellion. The cook, a burly man named Gus, who had a soft spot for Chloe, gave her a questioning look when he saw the ticket. "Uncle Bob," he grunted, wiping his hands on his apron. "Long story, Gus. Just make it extra good." "Okay." Gus nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. He'd seen Chloe give her own sandwich to a new dishwasher once. He knew her heart. While Bob ate, Chloe kept her distance, busying herself with refilling salt shakers and wiping down menus, all while keeping a wary eye on Brenda's office door. She watched him out of the corner of her eye. He ate slowly, deliberately, as if savoring every single bite. He wasn't eating like a man enjoying a meal. He was eating like a man refueling, like the food was a lifeline. When he was finished, he carefully placed his fork and knife on the clean plate. Chloe went over to clear it. "Was everything okay?" she asked softly. "It was the best meal I've had in a long, long time," he said, and the sincerity in his voice was heart-wrenching. He looked down at his hands, then back up at her. "I don't know how to thank you. I lost my job a few months back. My savings are gone. I'm trying to get to a shelter on the other side of town, but I didn't even have the bus fare." The story tumbled out of him in a quiet, halting rush. He spoke of a life that had unraveled thread by thread, a job lost to downsizing a wife who had passed away a few years prior, a world that had moved on and left him behind. Chloe listened, her heart constricting with every word. His story was a terrifying reflection of her own deepest fears. The fear of a single unexpected bill, a single missed paycheck, being the one thing that could send her and Leo spiraling into the same abyss. Impulse took over, overriding the rational part of her brain screaming about the rent money and Leo's inhaler. "Hold on," she said. She walked quickly to the staff lockers in the back, her hands trembling as she opened her purse. Inside was the cash from her morning tips, 2 5s and 7 1s, $17. It wasn't much, but it was everything she'd made so far that day. She took out one of the $5 bills. Then she hesitated. Bus fare was $2.50. A shelter might charge a small fee for a bed. What if he needed to eat again tomorrow morning? With a deep breath, she pulled out one of the 5s and 2 of the 1s. $7. It was more than a third of her earnings. She folded the bills neatly and walked back to the table. She printed out his check. The shepherd's pie was $6.999. With tax, it came to $18.42. She took the last $10 bill and the remaining 5 1s from her purse. It would take almost all her tip money to cover his meal. So be it. She approached the table and placed the closed check presenter in front of him. He looked at it with a pained expression. "Don't worry about that," she said, quietly leaning in. "It's taken care of." She discreetly slid the folded $7 under the edge of his water glass. "This is for the bus, and maybe some breakfast." Bob stared at the money, then up at her, his blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. He was speechless. He opened his mouth, then closed it, shaking his head in disbelief. "Why?" he finally managed to whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Chloe thought of Leo. She thought of her own struggles. She thought of how many times she had wished for a stranger's kindness, a small bit of grace in a hard world. "Because I've been there," she said, her voice barely audible. "We all get knocked down. The trick is hoping someone's there to offer a hand up." It was at that exact moment that Brenda emerged from her office. She moved with the silent, predatory grace of a shark that has scented blood. Her eyes darted from Chloe's hand, moving away from the table to the look on the man's face. "Martinez, what are you doing?" Brenda's voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet restaurant. "I see you're finally getting him to pay. Is he short? Is that the problem?" She strode over to the table, and before Chloe could stop her, snatched the check presenter. She flipped it open. Inside, instead of a credit card or cash, was the customer copy of the receipt. She then looked down and saw the $7 Chloe had just left on the table. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "What is this?" She picked up the money. "Are you paying this man to eat at my restaurant?" "No, Brenda, I saw you at the register," Brenda interrupted, her voice rising. "You used your employee discount code, didn't you? And then you paid for this meal with your own tip money." She wasn't asking. She was stating a fact. She had been watching. "He's my uncle, I told you." Chloe's lie felt flimsy and transparent under Brenda's furious glare. "Oh, I'm sure he is," Brenda sneered. She turned her venom on Bob, who sat frozen in the booth. "And you taking advantage of a young woman's misplaced pity. You should be ashamed of yourself." "That's enough," Bob said, his voice suddenly steady and firm. The defeated slump was gone, replaced by a straight-backed posture. "This woman showed me a kindness I haven't seen in years. You have no right to speak to her that way." Brenda let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Oh, I have every right. This is my restaurant, and she—" Brenda pointed a trembling finger at Chloe. "Is a thief. She stole from this company. She gave away a meal company property, and she did it on company time. I paid for it." Chloe insisted, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "It doesn't matter," Brenda shrieked. "You violated at least 3 corporate policies. Policy 7.4 on unauthorized comps, Policy 11.2 on misuse of employee discounts, and the most important one, you put your bleeding heart before the interests of Sterling Hospitality Group. We are not a charity." The words hung in the air cold and final. Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. She knew where this was going. She had gambled her job on a moment of compassion, and she had lost. Brenda's face was a mask of cold fury. "Martinez, my office, now." She turned to Bob. "And you, get out. We don't serve your kind here." Bob stood up slowly, his gaze locked on Brenda. For a moment, Chloe thought he was going to say something else to defend her, but he seemed to reconsider. He looked at Chloe, his expression a complex mixture of apology and something else she couldn't quite decipher. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the Gilded Spoon, the little bell above the door chiming his departure. He didn't take the $7. Chloe felt a wave of nausea. The empty space where he had been sitting felt like a void. She had tried to help, and in doing so, she had sealed her own fate. Numbly, she followed Brenda towards the small, windowless office at the back of the restaurant. The office was exactly like Brenda, neat, sterile, and utterly without warmth. Diplomas and certificates from corporate training programs hung on the walls in precise, even rows. Brenda sat behind her metal desk and gestured to the single uncomfortable chair opposite her. Chloe sat on the edge, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Brenda began, her voice deceptively calm. "I helped someone who was hungry, Brenda." "No." Brenda snapped, her composure breaking. "You jeopardized my position. You think corporate doesn't watch us. They track everything. Every discount, every voided order, every meal logged as waste. They see an anomaly like this, an employee paying for a customer's meal, and they ask questions. They ask me questions. They want to know why my staff is running a soup kitchen instead of a profitable business." She leaned forward, her eyes like chips of ice. "Do you know how hard I've worked to get this position, to keep my numbers in the green? This franchise under my management has the highest profit margin in the district. I did that. Not by being nice, not by giving away free food to every sob story that walks in the door." Chloe said nothing. There was nothing to say. Brenda's world was a fortress of rules and numbers, and Chloe had just lobbed a grenade of human emotion right into the middle of it. "I'm a single mother, Brenda." Chloe finally whispered a last desperate plea. "I have a son. I need this job." The mention of Leo was a mistake. It was a show of weakness, and Brenda fed on weakness. "That's not the company's problem," Brenda said flatly. "Your personal situation is your own. Your responsibility here is to this business, and you have failed in that responsibility. You are unreliable. You are a liability." She opened a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper and a pen. It was a termination form. She filled it out with quick, angry strokes. "Pack up your things from your locker. You can pick up your final paycheck on Friday. I'll have security escort you out." The words hit Chloe like a physical blow. "Security, Brenda, I'm not a criminal." "You stole from this company," Brenda repeated, her voice final. "As far as I'm concerned, that's exactly what you are." She pushed the form across the desk. "Sign this." Chloe stared at the paper. It was real. This was happening. For an $18 meal and $7 of bus fare, her entire life was being upended. The room started to spin. She thought of Leo's inhaler, the rent, the empty cupboards in her kitchen. A tidal wave of panic rose in her chest, cold and suffocating. Tears streamed down her face as she scribbled her name, her signature, a jagged, unrecognizable mess. She pushed the form back and stood up on wobbly legs. She didn't remember walking to her locker. She didn't remember the pitying or scornful looks from her co-workers. She only remembered the hulking presence of the security guard, a man she'd shared friendly nods with for 2 years, now standing by with his arms crossed his face, an impassive mask as she cleaned out her few belongings, a spare apron, a photo of Leo, a half-eaten granola bar. Walking out of the Gilded Spoon and into the harsh afternoon light felt surreal. The world was moving on around her cars, honking people laughing on the sidewalk, while her own world had just ground to a violent halt. The bus ride home was a blur of silent tears. Every clink of the fare box, every screech of the brakes was a new reminder of her failure. How could she have been so stupid, so reckless she had a child to think of? Her one and only job was to provide for him, to keep him safe, and she had thrown it all away for a stranger. When she got to her apartment, she didn't turn on the lights. She dropped her purse and keys on the floor and slid down the wall, pulling her knees to her chest. The water stain on the ceiling, the sad face, seemed to be weeping along with her. She wrapped her arms around herself and sobbed great gut-wrenching sobs of fear and despair. She had tried to do something good. She had tried to be the person her son could be proud of. And in return, the world had punished her with brutal efficiency. As darkness fell outside her window, Chloe Martinez felt a hopelessness so profound, so absolute. She was certain she would never see the light again. Chloe didn't sleep. The night was a long, torturous cycle of staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events, and succumbing to waves of panic that left her breathless. Every creak of the old apartment building sounded like an eviction notice being nailed to her door. How would she pay the rent? How would she afford Leo's medication? The questions circled her like vultures. By dawn, she was a hollowed-out shell of herself. She moved on autopilot, her body going through the motions of making breakfast for Leo, while her mind was 1,000,000 miles away, lost in a fog of dread. She managed a weak smile as she saw him off to the school bus, the effort feeling like it took all the energy she had left. Alone in the suffocating silence of her apartment, she sat at her small kitchen table with a day-old newspaper and a red pen. She circled 2 ads, one for a dishwasher at a 24-hour diner, the other for a night shift cleaner at an office building. Both paid less than she made at the Gilded Spoon with fewer hours. It was a grim reality. She was in the middle of drafting a resume on a piece of notebook paper, trying to make Waitress sound like logistics and client relations expert, when the knock came. It wasn't a normal knock. It was firm, confident, and resonant. Not a neighbor, not the landlord. Her heart leapt into her throat. Maybe it was someone from a collection agency already. She peered through the peephole, her breath catching in her chest. Parked on the curb outside her run-down building was a sleek, black sedan. It was the kind of car you saw in movies with tinted windows and a polished sheen that seemed to repel the grime of the neighborhood. Standing at her door was a woman in a perfectly tailored dark gray pantsuit. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun, and she held a leather portfolio. She looked completely, utterly out of place. Chloe's first thought was that she was from Child Protective Services. Had Brenda reported her for something, made up a lie? A new visceral fear seized her. She opened the door just a crack, keeping the security chain latched. "Can I help you?" Chloe asked, her voice raspy. The woman offered a polite professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Are you Miss Chloe Martinez? Who's asking? My name is Samantha Hayes. I'm an executive assistant with the Sterling Hospitality Group. Chloe's blood ran cold. Sterling Hospitality Group. They were here to finish the job, to threaten her with legal action, to make sure she never worked in the city again. If this is about yesterday, I've already been fired, Chloe said, her voice trembling slightly. I signed the papers. There's nothing else to talk about. She started to close the door. Ms. Martinez, please, Samantha said, her voice calm but firm. I'm not here about your termination. In fact, I'm here to offer you our sincerest apologies for that misunderstanding. Chloe froze her hand on the door. Misunderstanding. Mr. Sterling would like to speak with you personally, Samantha continued. He has sent a car to bring you to our corporate headquarters downtown. He believes he owes you an explanation and a conversation. Mr. Sterling, the big boss, the man whose name was on the letterhead. Why on earth would the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation want to speak with a fired waitress from one of his hundreds of restaurants? It didn't make sense. Was this some kind of cruel joke? A trick I don't understand, Chloe stammered. I know this is unexpected, Samantha said, her tone softening with a hint of sympathy. But I can assure you, it is in your best interest to come with me. Mr. Sterling is very insistent. Chloe's mind raced. What could she possibly lose? She had already lost her job. She had no money, no prospects. On the other hand, what if this was a trap? But the woman seemed professional, and the car was undeniably real. Curiosity and a desperate flickering ember of hope began to battle with her fear. What if this wasn't a trap? What if it was an opportunity? I'm not really dressed for a corporate meeting, Chloe said, looking down at her worn jeans and faded t-shirt. That will not be a problem, Samantha assured her. Please, Ms. Martinez, he's waiting. Taking a leap of faith that felt more like a plunge into the unknown, Chloe unlatched the chain. She grabbed her keys and her thin jacket, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She followed Samantha Hayes out of her building and into the impossibly clean, leather-scented interior of the black sedan. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving her grim reality behind, Chloe stared out the window at the familiar, struggling neighborhood, feeling like she had just stepped into an alternate dimension. She had no idea where she was going, or why, only that her life, which had ended so completely just hours before, was about to take a turn so sharp and so shocking that she never could have imagined it. The drive downtown was silent and surreal. Chloe sat in the back of the sedan, the plush leather seats a world away from the cracked vinyl of the city bus. She watched the cityscape transform from rows of low-rise brick apartments to gleaming towers of glass and steel. The car finally came to a smooth stop in a private underground garage beneath a skyscraper that seemed to pierce the clouds. The words Sterling Tower were etched in elegant silver letters above the entrance. Samantha led her through a private elevator that whisked them upwards with unnerving speed and silence. The doors opened directly into a reception area that was larger than Chloe's entire apartment. The floors were polished marble. The walls were adorned with abstract art, and a panoramic window offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the entire city. Mr. Sterling will be with you in a moment, Samantha said, gesturing to a set of soft leather chairs. Can I get you some coffee? Water imported from Fiji. Just water is fine, Chloe mumbled, feeling utterly out of her depth. Tap is okay. Samantha gave a small, almost imperceptible smile and returned with a glass of what was most certainly not tap water. Chloe sat perched on the edge of the chair, her hands twisting in her lap. She felt like an exhibit in a museum, a specimen of poverty brought in for study. Every tick of the minimalist clock on the wall amplified her anxiety. After what felt like an eternity, a set of tall frosted glass doors at the end of the room slid open. Samantha stood. "Ms. Martinez, Mr. Sterling is ready for you." Chloe's heart pounded as she stood and walked towards the office. Her palms were sweating. She was about to meet the man at the top of the pyramid, the faceless name that had controlled her working life for years. She steeled herself, expecting to see a ruthless corporate titan, an older, more formidable version of Brenda Walsh. She stepped inside. The office was vast, with a desk made of dark, rich wood that looked bigger than her kitchen table, but Chloe barely noticed the opulent surroundings. Her eyes were fixed on the man standing by the window, his back to her looking out over the city. He was tall and wore an impeccably tailored navy blue suit. He turned around slowly, and as his face came into view, the air left Chloe's lungs in a single silent gasp. The face was clean-shaven now, the hair neatly combed. The eyes were no longer clouded with despair, but sharp, clear, and intelligent. But it was unmistakably, impossibly the same face. It was Bob. Chloe swayed on her feet, grabbing the back of a chair for support. Her mind struggled to connect the two images, the destitute, broken man in the worn-out coat, and the powerful, confident CEO standing before her in a corner office that was probably worth more than everything she had ever owned. "You," she whispered, her voice cracking. The man, Robert Sterling, gave her a sad, regretful smile. "Me," he said, his voice no longer raspy, but smooth and commanding. "Please, Chloe, sit down. I know this is a shock." Chloe sank into the chair, her mind reeling. "But why, I don't understand." "That's why you're here," he said, walking around his desk and sitting opposite her, leaning forward with his hands clasped. "So I can explain, and so I can apologize." He began to speak, and the story that unfolded was more incredible than anything Chloe could have imagined. Robert Sterling had inherited the company from his father, a man who had built it from a single diner into a national chain. For years, Robert had run the business from this tower, surrounded by spreadsheets, market analyses, and profit reports. He had become disconnected, a king in an ivory tower, completely removed from the reality of the people who worked for him and the customers they served. "I started hearing things," he explained. "Whispers of low morale, customer complaints about our service feeling cold, impersonal. I saw the numbers. Profits were up, but our employee turnover rate was astronomical. Our customer satisfaction scores were plummeting. We were efficient, but we had lost our soul. The company my father built was about people. It had become about numbers." He decided he had to see it for himself, not through the filtered reports of his executives, but with his own eyes. So he devised a plan. For the past month, he had been going undercover, visiting his own restaurants disguised as a man down on his luck. He called it his empathy audit. "I visited 12 different locations in 3 cities," he said, his expression grim. "And what I saw, it broke my heart. I saw managers who treated their staff like disposable cogs in a machine. I saw employees so beaten down by policy and pressure that they had forgotten how to smile. I saw the rot that had set in the corporate culture I had allowed to fester. And then," he said, his gaze meeting hers, "I walked into the Gilded Spoon, and I met you." He recounted their entire interaction from his perspective. How he had been ready to give up, convinced that the company's core values were dead. How her simple question, coffee to start, offered without judgment, had been the first genuine warmth he'd felt. "You didn't see a bum, Chloe. You saw a person," he said, his voice thick with emotion. And then you lied for me. You stood up to your manager, a woman who clearly rules by fear, to protect a total stranger. You sacrificed your own meager earnings to feed me. And then you gave me money for the bus. He shook his head in disbelief. Even after all that, you gave more. When Brenda Walsh fired you, he continued, his voice hardening, it was the final, damning piece of evidence I needed. She called you a thief, a liability. She said the company was not a charity. She was the perfect embodiment of everything that is wrong with Sterling hospitality. And you were the embodiment of everything I wanted to be. Chloe sat in stunned silence, trying to process the enormity of what he was saying. Her act of kindness wasn't a firing offense. It was a test she hadn't even known she was taking. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry for what you went through. Robert Sterling said, his apology ringing with sincerity. I should have stepped in right then and there, but I needed to see how the system would play out to the end. It was a cruel thing to do, and you paid the price for my investigation. Your termination has been expunged. In fact, Brenda Walsh's termination is being processed as we speak. He paused, letting that sink in, before delivering the final, life-altering blow. This experience has proven to me that we need a radical change, a revolution from the top down, and I need someone to lead it, someone who understands that our greatest asset isn't our real estate or our supply chain, it's our people, someone who leads with compassion, integrity, and a fundamental understanding of human dignity. He leaned forward, his clear blue eyes locking onto hers. Chloe Martinez, I'm not offering you your old job back. I am offering you a new one. I want to create a new position, a new department in this company. Vice President of Employee Welfare and Customer Experience. I want you to help me rebuild this company's soul. I want you to take the kindness you showed me and turn it into corporate policy. I want you to make sure that no employee of Sterling Hospitality ever has to choose between following the rules and doing the right thing again. The job comes with a 6-figure salary, full benefits, and a mandate to change everything. Chloe stared at him, speechless. The world tilted on its axis. Vice President 6 figures? It was impossible. It was a dream. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of overwhelming, incredulous joy. She thought of Leo, of his inhaler, of the leaky ceiling and the overdue bills. In a single moment, the crushing weight she had carried for years had not just been lifted, it had been vaporized. "Why me?" she finally managed to whisper. Robert Sterling smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "Because Chloe, in a company full of people focused on the bottom line, you were the only one I saw who was focused on the lifeline." The ride back to the Gilded Spoon was completely different. Chloe sat in the front seat of the black sedan this time, not as a terrified fired waitress, but as an executive. Robert Sterling sat beside her, not in a suit, but in a simple polo shirt and trousers, looking more like a concerned colleague than a CEO. Samantha Hayes drove. "Are you ready for this?" Robert asked gently as they pulled into the parking lot. Chloe took a deep breath. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They walked in together. It was the middle of the lunch rush, and the restaurant was chaotic. The staff, her former colleagues, looked up, their eyes widening in shock to see Chloe back, flanked by a well-dressed man they didn't recognize. Brenda Walsh was in her element, standing near the kitchen pass, barking orders. "Table 7 needs a recook, Martinez." "Oh." She stopped dead in her tracks, her face paling as she saw Chloe. Her expression quickly morphed from shock to righteous fury. "What are you doing here?" she spat, marching towards them. "I told you you are not welcome on this property. I'll call security." "That won't be necessary, Brenda." Robert said, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable authority that cut through the restaurant's din. Brenda's eyes flicked to him, dismissing him as Chloe's new boyfriend, or perhaps a lawyer. "And who are you?" "My name is Robert Sterling." The name hung in the air for a moment. Chloe watched as Brenda's brain worked trying to place it. Then a flicker of recognition, followed by dawning, sickening horror. Her face went from red to a ghostly white. She had seen his picture before in corporate newsletters and on the company website. Mr. Sterling. She stammered, her entire demeanor changing in an instant. She smoothed her blouse and attempted a sycophantic smile. What a surprise. An honor to have you visit our location. I had no idea you were in town. If I'd known, I would have. You would have what Brenda. Robert interrupted, his voice cold. Put on a show for me. Hidden the truth of how you manage this restaurant and treat your people. He took a step closer. I've been in town for a while. In fact, I was right here in this restaurant yesterday afternoon. You might remember me. I was wearing a green coat. You threatened to throw me out. The last vestiges of color drained from Brenda's face. She looked at Robert, then at Chloe, and the terrible, complete understanding of what had happened crashed down on her. She was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Yesterday I saw the very worst of this company embodied by your cruelty. Robert said, his voice low and steady, yet carrying to every corner of the now silent restaurant. But I also saw the very best of it embodied by Ms. Martinez's compassion. You fired a woman for showing basic human decency. You told her this company wasn't a charity. Well, you were wrong. A company without a heart is just a machine, and this machine is broken. He gestured to Chloe. Ms. Martinez is your new superior. She is the new Vice President of Employee Welfare and Customer Experience for the entire Sterling Hospitality Group. Her first act in this role on my authority is to accept your resignation. Effective immediately. My resignation, Brenda whispered, her voice trembling. You're fired, Brenda, Chloe said, finding her voice. It was strong, clear, and free of malice. It was simply a statement of fact. Please clear out your desk. Someone will escort you out. She used Brenda's own words, but her tone was not cruel. It was final. Brenda stared at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. Then, without another word, she turned and fled towards her office, her humiliation complete. The entire restaurant staff stood frozen, staring at Chloe in stunned silence. Gus the cook was the first to react. He let out a loud whoop from the kitchen. Soon another waitress started to clap, and then another, until the entire room erupted in spontaneous, heartfelt applause. They weren't just clapping for Chloe, they were clapping for the hope she represented. Chloe felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at their faces. These were her people. She knew their struggles, their hopes. And now she was in a position to actually help them. Over the next few weeks, Chloe's life transformed. She moved with Leo into a small but beautiful new apartment in a safe neighborhood with a good school. The first thing she bought was a new top-of-the-line nebulizer for him. Her work, however, was her true passion. With Robert's full backing, she began dismantling the toxic, profit-at-all-costs culture. Her first proposal, ratified unanimously by the board, was the Golden Rule Initiative. It included a new, livable minimum wage, comprehensive health benefits for all employees, and paid sick leave. She rewrote the policy manual, replacing punitive rules with guidelines built on trust and empowerment. The rule about discarding returned food was replaced with a policy to donate it to local shelters, a policy she named Bob's Pantry. She established the Leo Martinez Emergency Fund, a grant program funded by the company to help employees facing unexpected personal crises, ensuring no one would ever be one broken-down car or one medical bill away from ruin. She traveled the country visiting restaurants, but she didn't come as a corporate suit. She came as Chloe. She worked shifts alongside the staff, listening to their ideas and frustrations. She promoted managers from within who, like her, led with empathy. The change wasn't just moral, it was good for business. Employee turnover plummeted. Customer satisfaction scores soared. The Gilded Spoon and other sterling restaurants became known not just for their food, but for their happy, motivated staff. Profits ironically reached an all-time high. Chloe never forgot the woman she was, the struggling single mother on the brink of despair. It was that memory that fueled her, that kept her grounded. One evening, standing on the balcony of her new apartment, watching Leo run around a nearby park, free and healthy, she thought back to the man in the worn-out coat. One small act of kindness, an insignificant gesture in the grand scheme of things, had not only saved her, it had created a tidal wave of positive change that had touched thousands of lives. She had hoped to offer someone a hand up, and in doing so, she had lifted up an entire world. Chloe Martinez's story is a powerful reminder that the choices we make, no matter how small they seem, can have a ripple effect we can't even imagine. Her decision to show compassion wasn't just about a free meal. It was a testament to the idea that our humanity is our greatest strength. In a world that often rewards selfishness, she chose kindness, and that single choice didn't just change her life, it transformed a whole company and bettered the lives of thousands of people. It proves that true leadership isn't about power or profit. It's about empathy and integrity. One person holding fast to what is right can indeed change the world. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of kindness, please help us share it. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible and inspiring true life stories. Let us know in the comments below about a time a small act of kindness made a huge difference in your life. Thank you for watching.